Welcome back to the show. I'm your host, Mr. B. Today was a pretty exciting day. There was some explosive interviews that took place on the political side. Donald Trump took questions from the press discussing a few topics that's been pressing, one of which is the Iran war and the latest developments on that. We're closer to peace, or is that kind of fleeting? NATO was another pressing issue. The escalation with the with the Russian-Ukraine war, and China and Cuba came up in discussions today in the Oval Office. Now, the one thing I have to give President Trump, even though I don't agree with him on this war and a lot of the foreign policy that he's been doing as of late, I'm not a big fan of, I at least appreciate the fact that he's willing to have the press ask him questions about it, which is different from what the prior administration was doing. Like, there was not very much press conference coming in. So he's at least willing to face it and take it head on. Now, that's not to say he hasn't taken steps in recent times to try to keep information from the public or to paint a picture that is rosier than it actually is. I'm not a fan of that. But at least the man is taking questions. That being said, let's jump right into it to see what he had to say today.
European allies help. We're discussing energy today. And
well, we don't need the help.
What kind of help would you want?
We're the most powerful military in the world. We gave them a chance to help, but they chose not to. NATO. We went to the NATO countries. We went to others too, in all fairness to NATO. And I wouldn't say I gave them a hard sell. I said, hey, if you'd like to help, it'll be wonderful. And they all turned us down. And, it's going to be an expensive proposition for them because they shouldn't have done that. They should have helped. We don't need it. We have our own. We have much more than we need in terms of oil and energy generally. But European countries and other countries, they need it tremendous. Some of the European countries need it really big. And they should have said, we'd love to help. But
if you could choose, but Mr. President, if you could choose, what would you ask them to do, sir? If you want.
Well, I would have asked them. I mean, there's not much. Look, we won. There's no Navy. There's no Air Force. We've wiped them out. We've wiped out their leadership and almost all of it. We've wiped out all their military leaders. They're down on the third. Now, maybe they're very good. I don't know. I can't tell you that. But certainly the first ones didn't do very good because they were literally, after 3 days, almost the entire military was wiped out. They had to get new generals. And then after that, they had to get more new generals. And we knocked out their anti-aircraft, their Air Force, just about everything you can knock out. So, and then you read in the fake news that they're doing really well in the war. I mean, it's unbelievable. We knocked out everything there is to knock out, and you'd pick up the fake news and they'd say how well they've done. They're doing brilliantly. They have no Air Force. They had we knew that, 159 ships. Andy, out of 159 ships, all 159 lie beautifully at the bottom of the ocean. We actually took pictures of them down there. And then you read the fake news. They say, well, their Navy is really great. You know what they have now? Little runabouts with a machine gun on the front. The ships don't even really deal with them. They're like a gnat, they get off. That's all they have. It's crazy. This country needs a fair press. And one thing I think that's done is expose how corrupt our media is. And I really do, while we're here, I hope the media looks at this election that's taking place in California, where they think it'll take 7 or 8 days to count the votes. Can you believe this? I mean, they spend all that money on the machines, the big voting machines. They think it's going to be 7 or 8 days before we know who won the election. But the numbers are looking strange because without any vote counting, the numbers dropped very precipitously for 2 Republicans that are doing well, that had been doing well. And I hope you're all watching it because I'm watching it very closely.
Mr. President, are you worried that China is funding an anti-data center movement here?
No, I'm not worried about it. We had a great meeting with China. And, they do things to us and we do things to them. I say it all the time. They say, oh, are you worried about China tapping your phones? I said, well, you know, they're worried about the same thing. No, we're very highly sophisticated. We've become very highly sophisticated. We had 4 years. I rebuilt the military. We had a military that was not good, and we rebuilt it. And I didn't know I'd use it quite as much, but we used it. Ukraine has been given a tremendous amount of our, without our military and our equipment, Ukraine wouldn't be alive to fight today. You know, I mean, just in terms of the question, we gave them hundreds of billions of dollars worth of equipment and the best equipment. And we make the best equipment anywhere in the world, but they wouldn't have lasted 1 or 2 days. They wouldn't have been able to do it. Remember the anti-tank missiles, remember that, right? When the tanks got stuck in the mud and then they went around and boom, 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 boom. And those were given by yours truly. They said Obama gave sheets and Trump gave the anti-tank as one of the most devastating weapons. But you check that out. But we have the greatest military. We have the greatest military equipment anybody's ever seen before. Look at Venezuela. We went in there. It was over after about 48 minutes. And, you know, they have a strong military, different kind of a military, but a lot of soldiers. And you look at Iran, where we essentially wiped out their military. Now, there's some missiles left, but very few compared to what they had.
I wanted to ask you.
All right, watch this. Hear that? That's my wallet. So this is what most wallets still look like. Thick, overstuffed.
Only restart the conflict with Iran if they killed U.S. troops. Is that your red line for ending the ceasefire?
If they killed?
U.S. troops.
What does that mean?
That you would restart the war with Iran if they killed U.S. troops.
Well, it would be a good reason. I'll be honest with you. If they kill U.S. troops, I think I would do that very quickly. Yeah, that's a very interesting question.
Iran, you responded to the vote in the House yesterday on the War Powers Resolution. Also, we've seen Hezbollah reject the U.S. brokered peace in Lebanon. You said that negotiations are in final stages, but Iran's saying they're stalled.
They didn't reject me. They didn't reject that. They're looking. I think Hezbollah. I will tell you, they called us and they said, "How about stopping?" And I think you're going to see things happen over there. That's been like a little bit of a different world, but it's interconnected with Iran. And it would be really nice if Lebanon could have some peace. Lebanon's been under attack for so many years and always like an underdog. And it would be really nice if it could end. And I spoke to Bibi Netanyahu about that. And I speak to them about it. And I actually spoke to Hezbollah about it. And I think progress is made. That's been going on for a long time. You know, when you look at that for years and years, 48 years, I say, well, let's get this settled. How long has it been going on? 48 years. I said, that's a long time. Not that easy, but go ahead.
As we get closer to the midterms, are you starting to factor in domestic reaction to this in your handling of this? Or are
I
you
just do what's right.
indefinitely?
No, I mean, look, it was like Venezuela was very unpopular. Then we won. And my numbers went through the roof. I have very high poll numbers. They went through the roof. It was very unpopular when I went to Venezuela. They said, oh, we don't want. Well, first of all, that one's relatively close. It's sort of a semi-neighbor, right? And the relationship with Venezuela is incredible. We've taken out millions and millions of barrels of oil out of Venezuela. It's very oil prone. I guess, Chris, one of the most, right?
Yes.
And we've taken out, you're sort of leading it, but you want to just tell them real fast about the relationship we have with Venezuela, Chris?
Yeah, things with Venezuela have gone very well. Venezuelan oil exports today are 3 times higher than they were right before we went in. So it has been a meaningful incremental supply of oil to the world. And one of the reasons we're solving a 47-year-old problem of Iran's race for nuclear weapons and oil prices in the U.S. We wish they were lower. But gasoline prices in the U.S. are, a little over $4. They're $10 in Europe. They're higher in Asia. They're very high in California. The bigger threat to energy prices in the United States is Democratic green energy policies. They have driven up energy prices far more than a conflict in Iran. And the conflict in Iran will come to an end. We hope the crazy green energy, drive up energy prices policy of the Democrats at federal and state levels, we hope that comes to an end too.
And remember this, if you want to call it a war, or if you want to call it a military operation, you cannot let Iran have a nuclear weapon. And everybody agrees to that, no matter, almost everybody. But wait a minute, our gasoline prices are lower than they were with Biden without that. And he would have let them have, in fact, he inspired them to have, frankly, a nuclear weapon, him and Obama. Obama picked the wrong country, you know that. And the Obama deal, I terminated that, or they would have had a nuclear weapon. That was a road to a nuclear weapon. Our deal, if we make that deal, and it's going well, but who knows? If we make that deal, it's the exact opposite. They will never have a nuclear weapon.
It sounds like you're in it for as long as it takes.
I'm not going to let them have a nuclear weapon. No. With Obama, it was a road. You know that. It was a road to a nuclear weapon. That was a short-term agreement. And at the end of which they would have a nuclear weapon. So they would have had it 4 years ago. Then we attacked with this beautiful plane right here, the B-2 bomber. We attacked 10 months ago. We attacked their nuclear sites and they were obliterated. It turned out that, CNN was wrong. They said, well, maybe they weren't hit that hard. They were hit so hard, nobody knows if you can even get it out. But the only ones that have the capability of getting out is us in China. We're the only ones with that kind of equipment that's powerful enough to go down that deep into a mountain. But that mountain crushed it. That mountain literally collapsed on top of it. Those pilots did one hell of a job. And now the atomic energy, as you know, has backed us up on that. They think it's a very, very hard thing to get it. But we'll get it anyway. But we're the only one, and China, I believe China too, but we're the only two that have the capability.
President Biden is out promoting a new book this week. When you met with Joe Biden, President Joe Biden, right here in the Oval Office on November the 13th of 2024, could you detect any cognitive decline in President Biden at that time?
No, not really. I mean, he was the same guy I've been watching for a long time. I mean, you could go back 40 years. I watched him 40 years ago, 30 years ago. He's never the sharpest guy. You do know that, right? It wasn't like he was sharp as a tack. But no, it was the same guy. They actually invited me here before the election, which was strange. We went here before, but then I met also, as you know, we did the ritual. And I mean, he was fine as far as I was concerned. I don't know, something happened to him during the debate. It could have been me. I thought I had a very good debate. Nobody ever says that. They say that Biden did badly. What about me? Did I do well? There's a reason he did badly. So the question is, did he do badly because he choked or because he didn't have it? But he didn't have a good, I would say this, he did not have a good night.
But during that time period, you met with him for about 2 hours. You didn't feel he was
No, he
down.
spoke softly,
Okay.
very softly. And as we started to speak, I mentioned this to people. We spoke very, very softly, very low, very low. And as we talked, we got along really well. And I thought he was fine. When I say fine, I mean, was he like talking to Doug Burgum? Was he like talking to Chris? Was he like talking to any of these monsters up here, all these tremendous politicians and environmental geniuses? Was he like talking to Andy Barr? No, he was fine.
I have a question about Hunter Biden. He's on social media now, and he has suggested, maybe joking, I don't know, that he could run for president in 2028. How would he do, Hunter Biden, in a 2028 Democratic primary?
Well, you would think that, past has something to do with winning an election. And I would say his past is not the greatest. Where's Hunter? Remember my Where's Hunter? It became the #1 shirt anywhere in the world for about 3 weeks. I'm not going to say bad. I'm sure, hey, if the guy from Maine can do well, I guess Hunter could do well too, because the guy from Maine is a basket case. And I would say worse than him is the one from Texas that looks like Alfred E. Newman. I would say that if he can do well, maybe Hunter can do well. I'm not sure. It'll be pretty close as far as I'm concerned.
And I've got a question about the nuclear dust. So the bombers go in, they entomb a lot of this enriched uranium.
Yeah.
At this point, Do you need a deal with Iran to go get it? Or have you thought about just a covert daring, send in the SEALs, send in the Rangers?
But I didn't want to be Jimmy Carter, you know. I didn't feel like being Jimmy Carter.
So that's off the
We
table.
did. Well, we thought about it right at the very beginning, before we did what we did, before we destroyed their entire military. We thought about it, and I didn't want to be in a position where you had, to get there. It's not like Venezuela. Like you go in, you're there for a matter of minutes, and you're out.
As a product manager, it's important that I listen to my customers and incorporate their feedback when building a roadmap and prioritizing feature development.
And everybody's waving goodbye as you take off, and you brought the cargo back. This is different. You'd have to be there for 2 weeks. You'd need massive equipment. You'd have to airlift the equipment in. You're in a war zone. And there was a time at the very beginning when we thought about doing that, because they would have not been watching, but they would have found out. I mean, during a period of a week to 2 weeks, you would have had a major construction operation, because that plane, and more importantly, those people that operate those planes, including the mechanics, they flew for 37 hours round trip. Think of that. And the tankers that refilled them 4 times. And what an operation it was. Amazing. And, but we would have been, Peter, we would have been there for a period of from a week to 2 weeks. We would have gotten it. But I said, I don't like the idea of that. All of a sudden they, pinpoint, they still had missiles left. That means they would pinpoint you and just keep lobbing them in until one gets through, and people would have gotten killed. So I didn't like it. We could get it right now. I don't think they could stop us if we wanted, but there's no reason to. It's entombed. You use a good word. It's entombed. We also have cameras on it through Space Force. We have very powerful cameras. Every door, there's a door, you know where the doors go? They go to bad places. But every single place on those mountains is basically three, because we also hit it with tomahawks after. After that, we hit it with tomahawk. Every inch of that land has cameras on it. We have about 9 of them, and they're on it. We cover it. So if anybody even got near it, we would know what we had to do.
And we heard you want to meet with the new Ayatollah, the new supreme leader.
I don't want to meet, but if I did meet, I'd be honored to meet him. I'd like to see if we make a deal. But if we make a deal, it's possible that I would meet him. I'd be okay with
Would
it.
that happen here in the U.S., White House?
Oh, I don't know, Peter. I haven't really heard too much about it. I didn't suggest it, but some people have suggested it. If it happened, it would happen. I'd be respectful.
Do you think because Epic Fury killed his dad and his wife and his kid that he's got hard feelings and wouldn't want to meet?
Well, I would say I'm not his favorite person, but with that being said, he's probably I don't know. He's probably a professional. In some circles, he has a very good reputation, actually. Sometimes some people say bad, but a lot of people say bad about me. It's totally false, of course.
Mr. On jobs, tomorrow the jobs report will be released. While the unemployment rate has been steady at 4.3%, the black unemployment rate has been 7.3%. When you ran for president, you courted black voters and talked about what you described as black jobs. How do you describe why this disparity is happening? What can you do to close that?
Well, we're doing very well with the black jobs, African-American jobs. I saw some numbers that we're doing really well. But where we're really going to do well is when all these plants are open. We're building many car plants. We're bringing cars back from Germany. We're bringing, we lost the car industry years ago. 54% of the industry went to Germany, Japan, Canada, Mexico. It's all coming back. It's amazing. And where your black worker is really going to do well is when those factories open. So I think they're going to be great. We've been doing very well. It's been a big focus for me. Yeah, please.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. President. On today's announcement, how do you ensure the estimated cost savings are passed on to the consumers and not held by the company? And then on Iran, what specific progress has been made today in talks with them, and where are the sticking points still?
So we're really lowering costs. When I came into this job, we had the highest inflation in the history of our country, 48 years, they say, but I think the history of our country, whether it's 48 years or more. But we had tremendous inflation with Biden, during the Biden. They had one of the highest ever. And I inherited that. the costs were very, very high. And at my first news conference, Peter and others were screaming at me about eggs. Remember, Peter? Eggs. What about eggs? Maybe it wasn't you, but I wanted to inject Peter into it. But he was screaming to me about eggs. And I said, what? Tell me about eggs. This is 2 days in. They said eggs had quadrupled. I said, well, they didn't quadruple under me. And they didn't want me to order eggs for the Easter egg hunt that was going to take place in a few months, right? And I said, nope, we're not going to. They wanted me to order plastic eggs. And I said, nope. And we got eggs down to lower than what it was long prior to when I took over. And eggs today are about 15% lower. What we had is a bunch of con artists, the Democrats. And what they did is they said, they left. They gave the highest prices that we've ever had for all products, groceries, everything. And they started saying affordability. They'd say, this is about affordability. It's a con job. I inherited their high prices. We brought those prices way down. And when and if you go back 3 months ago, if you go back before the war started, think of it, 3 months. So with Vietnam, we were there for 19 years. With Iraq, it was about 9 years. With another one, it was about 12 years. And with another one, we had all these wars that lasted for 9, 10, 12, 19 years for Vietnam. Think of it. And they said, you're in there for 3 months. This is a terrible thing. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers have been killed in these other wars. We lost not one soldier in Venezuela. We didn't lose one soldier. And we lost a total of 13, which is 13 too many. But when you look at hundreds of thousands of soldiers were killed in these various wars, they lasted many, many years. We're in there for a few months. And what we've done is amazing. They won't have a nuclear weapon. And we did, it was tough because we just got, Doug and everybody came in to say, we just got the best numbers. Well, today, again, the New York Stock Exchange and every other exchange just hit a new all-time high. That's 73 days out of my short term. We've hit brand new highs. Every 401k is setting records. A 401k, a lot of people have, you probably all have 401ks. Look at your 401k. You're happy about your 401k? You know, the nice reporters are smiling at me and the stupid reporters are like that. But their 401ks are setting records. They should be happy. They shouldn't be angry. They should be very happy. But 401ks are setting records. They've never had anything like it. So, you know, we've done a good job. As far as Iran's concerned, you're going to find out what the deal is. But the main parts of the deal is they can't have a nuclear weapon. The Strait will open immediately. You know, it's going to open immediately. And we've largely swept for mines. We have the most sophisticated mines. They're underwater minesweepers. I actually said to somebody, one of the generals, why underwater? He said, because usually it's hostile. You know, when you're looking for mines, typically it's not in a good neighborhood, right? So underwater made a lot of sense when it didn't take long to figure that one out. So I think we're doing very well, but we're going to see if we're going to win one way or the other. We're going to win on paper or we're going to win military. One way or the other. It's going to be militarily or on paper.
Mr. President, Mr. President, Thank you, Mr. President. How critical is energy dominance, whether it be coal, whether it be LNG, whether it be oil, to national security?
Without it, you can't win. As an example, AI is a big deal.
I got one challenge for you. Try WhisperFlow one time, and I promise you'll understand why
Whether we like it, not like it, it's going to be amazing in many ways. It's going to be, I think, for medical, it'll be amazing. But without massive amounts of energy, you can't even play the game. And we're leading China by a lot in AI. I was talking to President Xi about it. But if we didn't do, Lee Zeldin's done so great because, number one, fast approvals from professionals. You know, you'd have the best firms in the world submitting papers to. And we didn't keep them waiting for 10 years and then vote against them after 10 years. That way, guys would file with the environmental for a plant of some kind. After 15 years, they would be rejected. It was terrible. Now we have great professionals there, and we only accept plans from great professionals, but we give them fast turnaround. And it's been really amazing. I think the biggest thing we've done, Lee, is we let these geniuses with all this money build their own electric plant. We don't take it from our grid. We let them build their own plant. They become a utility. So they're building a plant And at the same time, they're building electricity. Because if we didn't do that, you couldn't have anything. You couldn't have, and we're letting that happen too with car plants and other plants. If they want to build their own electric, but with the AI, you know, you hear so much about it, but one of the biggest things they build their own. And then excess energy that they create will go back into the grid. Yeah, please.
Mr. President, on Cuba, Mr. President.
Just let him have one.
Mr. President, Secretary Rubio was in Delhi last week. He delivered a letter from you to Prime Minister Modi. And sir, you also addressed people of India through your favorite ambassador, Sergio Gore.
Right.
Yeah. Both of them have said the trade deal is around the corner. Where do you stand on the trade deal?
Well, we have it. And, you know, look, India for years has, and I don't blame them, I blame us because we had stupid people here. India for years really took advantage of the United States. You know that. Are you from India by any chance? Huh? I thought you were from Germany.
I'm from India.
I'm only kidding. You're central casting, okay? And that's a very good thing. India for years took advantage of this country. They charged us tremendous tariffs and they paid nothing. They wouldn't let Harley, as an example, in the past, they wouldn't let Harley Davidson sell its motor. They would charge 200% tariff. So Harley Davidson was precluded. They ended up going to India and building their own plants, which is unfortunate that that happened, but it happens. It was before me. But they charged tremendous amounts of tariffs to our company, and we didn't charge them anything. You know, they sold motorbikes here too. You know, we charged them nothing. And now it's the exact reverse. And we're making a lot of money with India, but we'll get to a deal because I like your prime minister a lot. He's a good friend of mine. Get along great. And we're going to make a deal. We have a very good relationship.
Mr. President, speaking of deals, Mr. President, on Cuba, are your sanctions on Cuba meant to accelerate its collapse?
No, it's just, we just want them to be a nicely run country that can feed its people. Look, it's a failed nation. Without Venezuela, you know, Venezuela, because it has such wealth in the ground, mostly in the ground, but Venezuela took care of them for years, and they took care of Venezuela. They were like the bodyguards. When we went in and burst into their country, the Venezuelans were guarding Maduro and everybody else. It was mostly, I mean, the soldiers were, in that case, we had a lot of Cubans were guarding. The Cubans were the guards, and they're good soldiers. But the country is starving, and it's got no energy, it's got no oil, it's got no money, it's got nothing. It's got a beautiful piece of land. You could have beautiful resorts, doesn't have oil, but Venezuela was giving them the money to survive. And now, you know, the money is, I guess you could say, is coming to us and is going to Venezuela. Venezuela has been an amazing thing because we paid for the cost of the attack many, many times over. And it's been a long time since you've heard of it.
Do you think that Cuba is close to collapsing, though, based on everything you just laid out? Do you think that Cuba is close to collapsing?
It sort of collapsed. And we're going to handle that as soon as we've finished. I like to do one thing at a time.
Okay, that was President Trump. He just had, I guess, his press conference earlier. And I like the guy, but I do disagree with him, especially on certain foreign policy things. The last question, we'll start with that first. He said, they asked him, is the U.S. accelerating Cuba's downfall by whatever blockade we have, or I guess we're limiting their ability to get oil? And he said, no, that's not true. I mean, anyone can see there's a reason why we're doing that. And we're doing it really to get their leaders to comply. But it's one of those things that I think, you know, it's maybe a bit inhumane to take those measures. This is not to criticize the administration and what he's doing, but I don't believe he's approaching that the right way. I understand that certain people that wants to see changes in Cuba, but I think that there could be a different approach there. Because, you know, people starving and losing food, I don't know how that, you know, how starving these people out so that they don't have electricity, they don't have lights. I think it's meant for the people to maybe uprise against their government and force them out. I don't know. But to me, I just feel like it translates differently, right? In a way, it translates in a way that probably make the Cuban people resent us. You know, if they view it as, you know, yes, their government may not be the greatest, but we're the ones preventing them from being able to put gas in a car or power up their houses and things of that nature. You know, there's an air of resentment that's going to come. So I just feel like these tactics could be, you know, detrimental to your overall goals, especially if the people end up resenting you. You may succeed in getting rid of the government, but inside, the people aren't necessarily seeing the tactics you use favorably, you know, if they had to suffer. At least that's what I think. Right. So I don't know. I'm not an expert on foreign relations, just a guy, you know, who's observing it from, you know, 1,000 feet up. You know, I'm sure they have a lot more information. By they, I mean the administration. They have a lot more information that I'm not privy to, and maybe the information they have may change my perspective if I was privy to it. But from what I can see, it just seems unnecessary from a standpoint of how they're going about it. The NATO thing pertaining to NATO, I do think Trump has some valid arguments there. Again, I don't fault NATO for not partaking in the war because I think it was an unjust war in the ways that we went and declared it. But I do think he's making a bigger point in that, right or wrong, your allies should be willing to stand next to you. And I think there's been many wars we had nothing to do with, including the Ukraine-Russia situation. But despite that, you know, Trump could have completely, the moment he came into office, discontinued any type of support to Ukraine. And it would have stopped the war immediately. But even though it wasn't the war he wanted to happen and he says would never have happened if he was in office, I mean, he still indirectly supported Ukraine and is trying to bring both men to the table to kind of resolve their differences. He didn't totally pull away all his support. I mean, he's still, you know, providing some support to some extent. But that's something he doesn't agree in, but he's still, in a way, working with NATO and providing some support. Selling them weapons, which they then sell to Ukraine and all that stuff. But in this conflict, even though NATO don't necessarily agree with it, they don't provide any support. Some of them won't let them use any bases, you know? And I just think certain friendships require that both people, you know, support each other, even when when they don't have a dog in the fight. Now, if NATO was that opposed to the war, I think they should have done more to talk Trump off the ledge. Excuse me. They should have done more convincing to get him to see things differently. But I think his point is, we spend all this money to support this organization, and when we need them, we can never really rely on them, you know? And even something as small as the Greenland thing, which I think he has a legitimate case to saying, well, these superpowers could be a threat to us, and we need to set up bases in Greenland, so we need to have control over it so that we can, and NATO's pushing back against that. Now, that's supposed to be for the protection of their biggest ally and also them, should the China or Russia want to, you know, travel that route. You know, there's no vulnerabilities there. I think everyone agrees that there's vulnerabilities there, but they're still not necessarily compliant. So there's a lot of pushback. And I don't think there's anything wrong with Trump saying we need to reassess how we support these quote unquote friends that we have. You know, sometimes they are friends when it's convenient for them to be, and when it's not convenient for them to be our friends, they're on the fence. And why should we continue to send an exorbitant amount of money and support, you know, for people that we can't rely on when we need them? I don't think that's an invalid argument. I think he has every right to reassess the relationships with allies that he has around the world. And though I don't agree with, you know, the war he decided to take on with Iran, I do think he has every right as the commander-in-chief to reassess his relationships and how he supports those relationships globally. So these guys like war, they like conflict, and I could care less if Trump decides he doesn't want to be a part of it. That's not, you know, I mean, it's yet another group of people trying to get us engaged in foreign conflict with an adversary. Why are we, you know, giving people like that an open channel to do that? So I don't fault him for reassessing that relationship. With regards to the Iran war, I'm going to use a term that a lot of the young kids of today use. That is cap. Trump is definitely capping. And by that, I mean, he's trying to paint a story that's not necessarily aligned. And, you know, you heard him kind of lash out at the press. And I understand that Trump is the type of person that always wants to sell an image of winning. But this operation is not like the operation that took place in Venezuela. It is not that at all. These people are very proud people, and they're willing to fight to the death. Even though we are, you know, militarily superior to them, they're going to defend themselves by any means necessary. And they do have a great leverage. The fact that they can track, you know, charge tolls for the Strait of Hormuz and create blockages that causes pain to the rest of the world is real leverage. And, you know, no one is questioning that we're militarily superior to them and that we've done a lot of damage to them, which Trump continues to remind everyone. But in reality, how the hell do we get out? That's the question. And as much as we decimated them, we can't just walk away. And that in itself is very telling of how effective they have been in fighting back. So I don't think he's justified in criticizing the fact that everyone with eyes to see can see that the Iran situation is not as easy to walk away from than it was to walk into. So, you know, I don't agree with his talking points on that. And, you know, while I like the guy, I just think that, you know, he bit off more than he can chew with this particular conflict. Now, you mentioned a few other conflicts with Lebanon and Israel and attacks and conflicts there. You know, I commend him for at least stepping in to get Israel to relax a little bit in terms of their offensive against the Lebanese people and this buffer. And, you know, I think that's a whole mess. And I don't know that Trump really has a control over that much. Of course, he's going to say that he does. You know, you would expect him to. And that's a little bit of bravado and things of that nature. But I don't know that he's got his hands on that thing like he would want to. And, you know, give him his kudos. He's been successful at least getting Bibi and the Israeli army to relent a little bit on their attacks. But any day now that could change. So, you know, I think Trump is also posturing for the up and coming midterms that's taking place. He knows foreign wars are very unpopular in this country, as much as he tries to paint a picture, which is why he gets upset when the media doesn't speak positively about how he's handling it. He does make valid points. It's only been a few months in comparison to other wars that have taken decades, if not, you know, some years, far more than, 1 decade to resolve. I mean, it is relatively a short window, but it's the pain points that people are feeling that I think Trump is a bit disconnected from, partly due to the fact that, he's insulated from what he can see. People around him is making money, so I think he's a bit far removed. I think if Trump started going back out on the road again and doing rallies, the people who voted for him would then relay to him their hardships. And I think he may change his position. One thing's for sure is Trump's definitely connected to what's being said out in the streets. This is a guy who's on Twitter. He's on social, on his True Social platform. He's paying attention to what's being said. So at some point, I think there's enough good in him that he should be able to see the pain points that this war is causing people, that at some point he should try to get the heck out of there for the sake of at least saving his legacy. Now, it is true that the diehard Trump supporters don't really care. They're going to support him irrespective. And this goes back to a point that I raised before. There are people that may disagree with certain policy positions that Donald Trump has, specifically pertaining to his foreign policy positions. This war he's taken on, when he said he wasn't going to do it, he lost some points, not just in my eyes, but in some other people's eyes. But on a lot of other domestic issues, there are things there where you could see why he still has his support. It's because the opposition is so radical in their thinking and their points of views that it's hard to really kind of win you over. So Trump may not bat 1,000 in that, or 100% in that. On 10 out of 10 issues, you with him on that. But take the foreign policy and a few other issues off the table, and maybe you're 7 out of 10 in support of what Trump is doing. And so that will explain why people still support him. So, it's really up to the opposition to now take positions that they can win people over on, but until they do that, even though people don't like Trump putting us in foreign wars, the alternative is people who's got far more radical policies that they don't agree with. So naturally, you're going to see his support's not going to change much. So if the opposition or a new party presents new ideas that can win people over, then you'll see more of his support dwindle. But that's my thoughts, man. I mean, that was a press conference he did earlier. And, I wanted to share that. I didn't get a chance to really speak on it earlier, but, we're going to definitely grind and make up for that time. So I thank you guys for joining me. Those of you who stuck out for this segment, I ask that you like and subscribe and stay connected. If you're not already connected to the show, definitely stay connected, but also weigh in, leave a comment. Let me know what you think on some of the subjects that we touched upon today. All right, guys, that's it for me. Have a good one. God bless you until we speak again. Later.